Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Elevate Your AIQ. This is your host, Bob Pulver. Today I am joined by Siadhal Magos. He is the CEO and co-founder of Metaview, which has built a leading interview intelligence platform focused on transforming how interviews and other hiring conversations are conducted, analyzed, and learned from. Siadhal and I dig into how interviews, one of the most important and subjective decisions in business, are being reshaped by AI to improve overall hiring intelligence. We talk about the hidden complexities of hiring, the disconnect between what's said in an interview and what's remembered, human versus AI bias, and how better interview intelligence can elevate the experiences of candidates and hiring teams, as well as increase quality of hire. Siadhal also shares why structured thinking, curiosity, and tight feedback loops are essential for building not just great products, but great teams. Thanks for listening to the show. Let's go chat with Siadhal. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Elevate Your AIQ. I am your host, Bob Pulver. With me today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Siadhal Magos. How you doing this morning, Siadhal?
I'm very good. Thank you, Bob. How are you?
I'm good. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Siadhal, I've spent a lot of time in the last couple of years when I pivoted into the sort of talent, I call it talent transformation space. But the interview intelligence space was always really intriguing to me. Interviews are tough, I think, for both participants and the rest of the team, for that matter. Yeah, so I'm excited to dig into this conversation. Why don't we just kick things off? Why don't you just give our listeners a little bit about your background and your path to Metaview?
Yeah, sure. So by way of background, thanks so much, Bob, for having me on. By way of background, so yeah, I'm Siadhal, one of the co-founders at a company called Metaview. Spent most of my career in product broadly at US tech companies. So I was at Uber before starting Metaview, for example, which is really where I got exposed to like hiring becoming a very significant part of my job, and where a lot of the sort of the scar tissue and inspiration came from for starting Metaview. Been working on Metaview for a while now, and obviously, pumped to talk more about that. But yeah, background really was on product, working out how we can use technology to give people leverage. That's really what I frankly, I guess is the common theme of my career and continues to be what I think about in the context of Metaview. I think there's two elements to that. Is like a good understanding of the technology and what's possible. And obviously that's especially relevant now because the technology landscape is shifting so quickly that sort of keeping a pulse on that is a really important part of what I do. And then the second part of that is understanding what the market actually needs. Market is just made up of people, right? What do people need? And obviously I focus that energy on, understanding people involved in recruiting. What are they looking for? What are the things that are keeping them up at night, stressing them out, slowing them down, that sort of thing.
So let's dig in to some of that. Just to give people some perspective, Metaview, like you said, you guys started, 2018, 2019? And you've had a pretty significant growth spurt, I would say, of late. And so I thought you could just sort of unpack what you guys are doing, what area of talent, the talent lifecycle that you're focusing on, and target markets, things like that.
So Metaview is an AI platform, the AI platform for recruiting conversations. So really, when you think about sort of what parts of the pipeline do we impact, it's actually every step. If you broke it really down sort of simply into, hey, we need help finding candidates, we need help assessing and evaluating or extracting information from candidates. That's usually what you do in your interviews. Or we need help deciding who to hire. Metaview is sort of present alongside the recruiter and the hiring team every step of the way, because conversations are a big part of every single part of that, right? There could be, hey, listen, I'm going to have an intake meeting with the hiring manager so I know who to go and source. Metaview has a particular summarization model and a way of pulling out the most relevant information from these intake meetings to help you with your sourcing strategy or your ideal sort of candidate profile document, whatever it is you're putting together. Metaview is also involved in the conversation, the interview conversations, and again, extracts all the most relevant information from those conversations. So you have all the information you need when you're assessing the candidate. And then when it comes to deciding, a lot of the time people decide via a debrief meeting. A bunch of people get together, throw around their opinions or their recollections of the candidate. And again, this is really valuable sort of morsels of data for the hiring manager when it comes to making that final decision. Metaview helps with that. So really from a workflow perspective, we're present throughout. But the core product is a place where recruiters and hiring managers go to both understand what's everything we know about a candidate, given all of the interviews we've had with them, as well as increasingly, Metaview helps you with your next steps after those conversations. So for example, creating a job post might be something you do after an intake, or, getting prepped for the debrief might be something that happens after the interviews. And we help with a bunch of that workflow as well.
Yeah, I think when I first heard about what you guys were doing, it was focused exclusively on sort of note taking within the interview, like a human to human interview. I have to qualify that these days. So sort of down, sort of mid or bottom funnel might even be in person, right? I mean, you could handle in person, right? It doesn't have to be like a Zoom interview, right?
That's correct.
So you guys have expanded quite a bit, which I definitely appreciate. I think one of the things that I think about, and just to give people sort of a frame of reference, obviously recruiters and hiring teams know this, but just for others, interview is obviously one part of the talent acquisition and recruiting process, but there's a lot of insights that are gathered, obviously, when you're getting free form, information from a candidate who's responding to the questions, asking questions themselves, et cetera. But there's other sort of intelligence that you can gather throughout the process. And there are, to your point about, recording conversations, there's a whole bunch of conversations that might not actually involve the candidate, but still affect the candidate and still affect the quality of the pipeline that you're bringing in. So you've really branched out to say, look, let's help you make better hiring decisions. It's almost like interview intelligence is a component of a broader lens around hiring intelligence and even decision intelligence, if we think about it that way.
Yeah. And maybe that to zoom out sort of one step further about, okay, sure, what the product's what it is now, but like, why does the company exist? We really started Metaview with like a thesis that to us was obviously true, but the question is, was it feasible to do anything about it at the time that we started the company? And the thesis that we think is obviously true, and I think you'll agree, I think a lot of people listening will agree, is that most of the information that you use when operating a hiring funnel is information you receive via conversations. That could be because I've spoken to 10 candidates and I've learned a ton of information about them. It could be because I've spoken to the hiring manager once a week for the last 3 weeks to understand this role better. But all of the data is in these human-to-human interactions. And so there's two sort of consequences of that, which is why I think Metaview has been able to expand the product line so well recently. One consequence is, well, literally the most important data to you as someone who's operating the hiring funnel is within these conversations. So any platform that has that data is going to be really helpful for you in a bunch of the things that you need to do. And the second thing is that same sort of thesis applies to AI. Actually, however you're going to use AI, and we know AI is already changing and is going to continue to change how we work. The AI that's going to be the most impactful is the AI that has the best understanding of your context. And there's a couple of ways you can get context into AI. One is to write a massive prompt really thoughtfully and include every morsel of information that the AI might find useful that's sort of particular to your situation. And the other is to sort of give it access almost to your universe in a way. And so that's why Metaview's sort of got this opportunity to move into this job post creation, preparing people for making decisions. And there'll be other things that will come and like reporting on top of the data as well. The reason you can do it is because this is the context that matters. If you ask Metaview a question about the candidates in your pipeline, its ability to answer it accurately is infinitely better than if you just ask ChatGPT, because ChatGPT doesn't know anything about your pipeline, despite the two products being based on the same large language models. Metaview just does a better job because it has the context. So that's really the key. Is the hiring context is in the conversations. Anything we're going to do with AI and recruiting is going to be better if it knows what's going on in the conversations. And that's really where Metaview sort of fits in, because we're the home of that conversational data for, 2,000 plus companies at this point.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Thank you for adding that color, because I think that a lot of people, and I felt this way probably a year and a half ago as well. It's like, wait a minute, I have, the otters of the world, right? Like I personally use read.ai, but Fireflies and all these sort of let's record this Zoom. I think Fathom is another one that maybe incorporates the video as well. There's a bunch of these out there, but as much as I've been impressed with some of them, and the dashboard that I get afterwards with, action items, and even it gives me a sentiment score as well. It's still just starting fresh every time, recording that conversation in isolation, right? It's still not understanding who this candidate is, what job they're applying for, what else do I know about this team, what are some of the maybe intangibles or less obvious, attributes that we might be looking for. How can it sort of read between the lines as it relates to the role and the needs of the team? So this is one of those areas where you can't just, put a sort of wrapper around some of these large language models and call it a day, right? Like there's a lot of nuance that's needed here.
There's a lot of nuance, and it's also, there's so much going on. So many people are building like very cool products in AI. So whether it's nuance or whether it's just the better you can make the product in a competitive environment, that's what you need to do. And when you're really focused on a workflow like we are in recruiting, that's where you sort of go down that idea maze that you just described was, well, hang on, wouldn't this AI do a better job if it knew what role this was for? And would it not even do a better job if it knew the job description for that role? And what about if it knew the rubric? And what if it knew all the previous candidates who hired and have done really, you just start to think about if I could be Iron, if I was the world's sort of most super intelligent recruiter, these are all the things I'd want to store in my mind at once, which is obviously impossible for a human to do. But you can actually condition or create the environment for the AI to do that. And really Metaview's job is to provide that. We're not an infrastructure company. We're obviously we're an app that people use, every day, multiple times per day. But it's almost like we're building this user experience infrastructure for people to be able to think about, how do I engineer the context so that I'm getting as much value as possible out of OpenAI's latest, LLM update for my recruiting workflow. That's the sort of almost weird that we are that translation layer for customers, which I know sounds a little bit sort of maybe theoretic. The fact is it's a real, it's a very pragmatic product, but that's in a way, that's sort of what we're doing.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's an incredibly important space. I think so much gets lost in translation. Maybe it's because, individual interviewers are, they're not taking furious notes because they're trying to be respectful and pay attention. Maybe there's nonverbal, cues that they want to sort of, assimilate into the notes that they take. And I think that's part of the value of capturing this is you're sort of, well, we'll talk about responsible AI and bias in a second, but I think there's all these sort of human, biases that, maybe can be mitigated to a degree if you're sort of capturing that. And then as you aggregate it together across multiple, interviews or a group interview or what have you, you can sort of take a peek under the hood and say, how can we do better next time? This isn't just for this particular situation and this particular role that we're hiring for. Let's think about how we make our interviewers, better. What are we not giving candidates enough time to ask their own, questions, what's kind of going on, behind the scenes, and what can we infer from, the insights that are derived from the solution, right?
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
I was just curious about the feedback that you get from your customers. Obviously, you've had significant, customer growth and funding as well. So congrats on that. I was curious about the feedback that you get. Is it mostly from recruiters who are just so thankful that, they don't have to seriously take notes and this has made their jobs easier through the process itself? Or maybe more on the insights side, this is actually providing me with an important sort of learning, mechanism where I'm getting insights that are showing me that my quality of hire is going up. I'm just curious to get just a feel for how your customers are responding.
Yeah, it's transitioned over time. So I'd say for maybe if you think about sort of the GPT moment was November 2022, we launched with sort of the core summarization product in January, February 2023. So sort of 2 or 3 months later. For the first at least year, maybe 18 months, it was all about, hands-on IC recruiters saying, "Oh my God, thank you so much. This saved me." This is like, and it was almost funny, the amount of people that call it a game changer. And it is a game changer. I think, much as it's very easy to live in a bubble as an AI company and sort of think that every company is advanced and this sort of thing, but it's definitely an emerging best practice that you should be capturing this interview data now that you can do stuff with it. And stuff can just mean having the AI write your notes for you, just so your people can focus on showing up better for a conversation. And so anyway, those are the two pieces of feedback we had for about 18 months, where the most consistent was, wow, I can actually be myself and be present, be humorous, be curious during a conversation now. Feels so much better. And also, I don't spend half an hour, 40 minutes sort of cleaning up whatever I can remember or whatever notes I did take after the meeting, because Metaview has all these sort of affordances for structuring notes in like a very smart way, given the role and this sort of thing. So that was the initial. There's still a bunch of that doing. I think that's still to many people the core value, and recruiting leaders really like that aspect of the product, because it means if they bring Metaview in, it's benefiting the people who are doing the work day to day, as opposed to just something that they want, which sometimes is the way with software. Any piece of software where you hear people complain about the user experience a ton, that's because there's someone else in the company who's not actually the user of the product who's benefiting from some report somewhere or something, and that's why you're forced to use it. And Metaview is firmly not in that bucket. It's very much, we want the people that do the hiring to be able to do better work. But increasingly, as note-taking, AI note-taking is becoming a best practice in every other workflow as well, like, customer support meetings, sales meetings, team meetings, whatever it might be. Everyone's sort of got their own favorite note taker nowadays. Increasingly, both our focus and then also therefore the feedback we get is a lot more around the insights, because we put a lot of effort into having the most accurate and most configurable, most comprehensive actual summaries. And we try really hard to differentiate in that regard versus, say, a generic AI note taker, and people definitely bias for that reason. But then there's also things you can do that are far beyond really the remit of a note taker, because you have the conversational data. And increasingly, that's where we get a lot of our feedback. Just to bring to life what I mean, a really simple example, I'm happy to talk about more if we think it's useful, but I don't want to sort of take it there unnecessarily. Once you've had, been using Metaview for 6 months, let's say you've had hundreds, maybe thousands of conversations through the platform across both your recruiting team, but also maybe your hiring managers and your interviewers, understanding what, candidates are communicating as their compensation expectations and how that's changed over time, for a given role in a given geo. Like the conversational data is a really good source of that. If you want to have a discussion with your HR team about what the comp band should be. And okay, cool, I get it. The data from Radford says this, but candidates every day are telling us this, and it's gone up since this moment. You can have that type of a conversation because our AI has this understanding. That's a really key insight for a recruiting team. And same thing about sort of certain characteristics of your interview process that it will pick up are, misaligned with maybe your expectations of what the interview process is supposed to be like, which are, again, like, they're obviously very connected to the note taker because it's to do with the conversational data, but it's not actually anything to do with the notes. Like, the notes are irrelevant. The notes are to help you with your workflow, but then there's this other aspect of it, this other part of the product, frankly, which enables you to gather insights that almost like a different person in the company might be interested in. It's not actually the recruiter necessarily.
Yeah, I think in general, calling it a note taker, an AI note taker, is completely underselling what it's actually doing.
Funny, we bat that idea around so much, and I've heard a lot from actually other founders in other spaces as well, where, frankly, when someone lands on your website, you really want them to sort of feel two things, and these two things are intention. One, you want them to know exactly what this thing is quickly, and of course that's where AI Note Taker does a great job, because if that's what you're looking for, then you want to show up as, hey, we are one of these things. But then the second thing is you want them to understand the sort of the gravity of the moment we're in this AI revolution, and that we think we're a really great partner for, not that we've got everything figured out, but we're a really good partner for you to sort of move into this AI first world. It's really hard to do both. So yeah, I agree. I think note taker's underselling. That has some disadvantages, but also it really sucks if someone lands in your website and then says, okay, so what is it? So what does it actually do? And that's what you're trying to avoid.
Well, yeah, I'm gathering when you're prospecting with customers, they're going to tell you, oh, we're on Google Workspace. I can just use Gemini to record, the conversations. And then somebody will say, oh, well, I created a gem, a custom whatever inside Gemini, and I can, do some of the, look, if you've got the resources to try to do that, I guess that's a poor man's, version of a solution like Metaview, but you're still not going to get.
Optimize your business with a workforce AI edge powered by Vizier. Make smarter decisions and achieve better outcomes with real-time AI insights delivered to every people leader. Explore more at visier.com.
Everything that you're offering, unless it's unless you really make a huge investment in that space. But I guess as I was thinking more about this, and I remember looking at this space in the early days. I think I was at Talent Tech Labs at the time. We were looking at some of these early solutions in this space, and so capabilities have grown up quite a bit. I think one of the things I think about is like it's a customizable like summarization engine for whatever conversation you're having, right? Because you tailor it to the job, you tailor it to the circumstances, and yes, the transcription is there, which is sort of table stakes, but it's really about how effective is the summary and the way that some of the key details are summarized to make it easily digestible to different audiences, right?
That's a reason to use Metaview rather than a generic note taker the yeah, I you said customization, I would say configurability of but same thing, just different word, of the notes. But there are literally other modules as well that are, again, like actually a stone's throw from the note taker. They're just better because they have the conversational data, which is, now we sometimes have customers who buy Metaview actually not for the note taker. It's actually for what we do with the conversational data in other parts of their workflow, which I think is a really interesting development, actually, because a lot of people think about bots, like you see, it's almost like a meme, right? With people, oh my God, look, there's like 5 bots on this call I showed up for. And like, clearly that's not going to be the way it is in future. And, we don't think of Metaview, for example, like and then maybe this is another way or another reason why talking about it as a note taker is sort of underselling things, because I think people think note taker, then they think bot turning up on a meeting, when actually, no one wants the bots actually there, right? It's in some ways it's really good for clarity that this conversation is being captured and all these sorts of things, which so there's good reasons for it, but it's not, no one wants 5 bots on a call. Really, what we care about is, and we don't think of ourselves as a meeting bots company. We think of ourselves as an intelligence layer for, hey, there's this particular part of your, if you think of if you're a, mid-sized, large organization, thousands and thousands of hours of conversations are happening in your company every week. Some portion of those are related to hiring. And the AI that's helping you with hiring is going to have access to those conversations. And that's what Metaview is going to be. Right now, because we were so early to the market, that meant we had to also capture the conversations. But I bet you that in a year or two's time, we might not even bother doing that anymore. That might be, of course, every conversation is getting captured. You're really using us as this, custom summarization sort of a configuration tool, conversational reporting tool, and then like N other things that we'll do with that conversational data.
Are people recording the sort of deliberation meetings? Like, let's say you've got your final candidates and people are in a room. Are they recording that to be the sort of Uber aggregator of all of that?
Yeah. People are there's a bunch of reasons. Yes is the short answer. And then there's a bunch of really cool things you can do when you do that. So a great example of why, I don't want to turn this to sort of too Metaview focused, but I guess, we're going there, so let's do it. But obviously Metaview understands the sort of the concept of a candidate, whereas like a Google Gemini just doesn't, I mean, it would if you ask it because it's got an incredibly smart LLM powering it, but it's not built into the infrastructure of the product. So our product understands, well, Bob is someone you've spoken to 5 times, and this debrief was also about Bob. So I can put all of those conversations almost in one canvas for you, and also upload the job description and sort of just pull out across all those 5 hours of conversations and the debrief and the resume and whatever else it is, help you sort of, or create the environment for you to play with this data, to interrogate all of this data that you have. And obviously the debrief is a great part of this because, understanding, hey, Jill mentioned Bob looks weak on XYZ. What evidence do we have from the 5 hours of interviews? You don't want to spend 5 hours going through it all. You don't necessarily just want to believe Jill not because she's lying, but maybe because, we're all fallible humans. So debriefs are really important for that, actually. And just tactically, Metaview has a particular configuration of a summary that is built for debriefs. You can always edit it, but there's like we've sort of fine-tuned a summarization model for that.
Okay. I wonder if people, you can tell me if you've come across this, but like, I wonder if people are holding back in general on the talent acquisition side. Are they holding back with raw, unfiltered feedback, knowing that that feedback is going to be recorded and retained in perpetuity? Like so and so, Joe, Joe doesn't seem to like. This is the second time Joe. I'm just thinking about the insight. What the insights? Well, this is the third time. I'm thinking about the decision making team, right? Well, this is the third time that Joe, didn't like someone who like went to this school or came from this company or like whatever. I mean, is it revealing people's own sort of human biases? And if so, like what do you do about that?
Yeah, so I think there's two parts to your question. Is one, does it affect people's behavior in the meeting, in the conversations, knowing it's being captured and, I guess synthesized in this way by an AI? I think it's definitely not sort of a huge impact where customers say to us, oh my God, this has like totally changed the way all of our people talk to each other since we definitely don't hear that. And I think a lot of people will have experienced note takers in general and realized it doesn't sort of affect behavior massively. But I think it would be naive to think that like, I'm having this conversation with you now. I know it's recorded and, it's probably different to the way that I talk to my friends on the weekend when they're at the pub. Of course it is. So I think it would be naive not to think it might have some sort of small impact. And then I think then the question is, well, is that a good or a bad thing? Obviously, I think the same applies to, how people communicate over, instant messenger or email. That is probably is different to when they, again, are in similar situations where they know it's not recorded. So I do think there probably is a human behavioral impact there. And I think there's, I think the benefits, I think there's a question whether that's a bad thing. And then there's also a question of if it is a bad thing, do the benefits outweigh that bad thing? Which I think the answer to that clearly is yes. So that's one part. Does it affect behavior? Then the second part of your question is, how do people feel about the idea that they might be getting analyzed in this way? Which I think is in some ways I don't want to say it's the better question, but I think that's something to wrestle with for sure, because we all want this technology to work for us. We definitely didn't start Metaview to be like a big brother company that sort of catches out people doing whatever it might be. But equally, if we've got one of our customers who's the head of recruiting or recruiting manager, head of recruiting operations, and they're passionate about trying to solve a problem, and they think the conversational data is going to help them understand this thing, and that using AI on top of the conversation will help them root out a business problem, then of course we do stand for that. So I think that's an interesting tension there, and we're all figuring it out. I would say historically we've been very much on the side of the users. So if you're one of those people who doesn't want the data used in that way, then like, okay, that's our marching orders. We're here to help you, save you time, make your life easier. We're not here to catch you out. I think as we're moving more towards, and that's both because we resonate with those people, but also because those were the people who are adopting the product. Now, as you're moving towards capturing this data being a best practice, these organizations, they just have expectations around what they're going to be able to do with this data. And, you end up trying to find that right balance alongside them.
I know it can be uncomfortable getting, feedback, whether you're an interviewer or a candidate or just in a performance review or whatever. I mean, it can be awkward, but it's supposed to be constructive, right? And so I don't personally mind. It's easy for me to say this, not being on the interview team or getting called out for having a certain, bias or whatever, but we all have, inherent biases. And so in the interest of not focusing on where AI exhibits bias, but also just being reflective and thinking about all the bias that's already in all the decisions that we've made since the dawn of time, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that we're calling people out. I just wonder, and there's been a lot of research that I'm sure you guys keep up with around, how is behavior changing when we interact with AI solutions, or in the case of interview intelligence tools, knowing that there's something, it's not just a human, but perhaps multiple humans and multiple AIs are sort of evaluating, the things that we say. So it's always sort of a tough situation.
And just to be clear, because I don't want listeners to come away with the wrong sort of understanding, the sort of the scenario you mentioned of, hey, we've noticed that, person X always rejects candidates from this background and doesn't give them enough time to talk or something. Metaview doesn't currently make those proactive observations and sort of judgment. And that if you sort of think about what is, how does a company like ours or like a team like ours literally think about that situation is, well, AI is really useful for gathering and synthesizing verifiable information. Verifiable means to us as like a rule of thumb is almost, if you asked sort of, any intelligent being is this X or Y, they would all say the same thing, like, because it's clearly true, it's objective, I guess. And we try and avoid these sort of subjective things. Now, does that mean that we don't give tools for people to be able to interrogate this data and ask the question, hey, who else has Bob rejected in the past? What were there? But you can do all that stuff, which are questions you could never answer before. So it's more tools to help you with those investigations. The one you described is not the most common thing that happens on Metaview by any means, but it still would be possible.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I didn't mean to imply that that's where you're going. I kind of stretched that scenario out maybe a couple degrees too far. But these are things that I think about because I think it's important for people to try to think a couple steps ahead of where this goes, right? Because we've already seen, like, you don't want to be in the headlines for the wrong reasons, which a lot of companies are already. They, over automated, they use AI maybe where it wasn't completely appropriate or where it wasn't thoroughly tested and evaluated. And so it just kind of puts, black marks on some of the things that we're trying to accomplish, because overall, I'm absolutely a cautious optimist and technologist. I think there's tremendous potential here. So I wanted to shift gears a little bit on the sort of like the human-centric, side of this. Obviously, I care most in talent acquisition about the human candidate, but there's other people involved, and certainly want to give people back more valuable time working with humans, using their human traits and those durable skills that are going to outlast and complement anything that the AI brings to the table. I was thinking about two things. One is on the candidate experience side, candidates, as you know, are often sort of left in the dark about where they are, no matter what stage they're in the funnel. Could you provide a sort of sugar-coated version of the summary to the candidate, or does that like open up a can of worms? Like, this is like, we don't want to go there. That's not our target audience. Yes, there's might be some valuable things that we can feed back, but that's sort of gets us into a risky territory.
Right now, Metaview has no relationship with the candidates that go through our platform. They're totally owned by our customer, and it will stay that way. Now, the only situation where we'll do that is if customers are consistently saying to us, we're obsessed with candidate experience. We want everyone who comes through our pipeline to sort of feel like they, learn something about themselves, even if we don't hire them. So if they're using language like that, and we're like, you know what, we want to support that. We think that's important too, because you think it's important, not you think it's important because the candidate thinks it's important. Cool. And we think it's important because you think it's important. So therefore we'll do it. So I can imagine that happening. It's not like top of the priority list right now, but there's no sort of like principled reason we wouldn't do that. But we definitely wouldn't be like, that's more, we'd do that more from a customer priority if it's priority to them, which obviously candidate experience is one of the, top 3 to 5 priorities for most of our customers. And it comes up sometimes, hey, it would be great to give candidates something as well. Right now, you can do it manually. We haven't built a product. We haven't built a candidate-facing product for Metaview. We're not planning to in the short-term future. But yeah, could happen. Is probably not. If you think about the revolution that's occurring right now in a lot of time, personal productivity, it's probably not the biggest. It's probably not the biggest fish to fry, I would argue.
Yeah, I do imagine it would get tricky, especially if you were, like a semifinalist, or you were down, you made it, pretty far through the funnel. It's one thing to give feedback through one of these, pre-hire assessment, AI interviewer kinds of things, but once you get down, you're gonna just put a lot of thoughts into the candidate's head about like, well, okay, this all sounds great. So what's the problem? Like, why didn't I get the offer?
You're touching on something that we're all facing, which is, I think it's good for us to talk about, even if it is way beyond us and like practically any other human to sort of make predictions around, but good to sort of like have out in the air at least, which is like, is there something, is the intangible there that given this human being has committed hours probably to your recruitment process by that point, is not the dignified thing to do to have a human explain to them the situation? And maybe not enough companies are doing that now, and they are doing just written rejections. And that's because holy cow, I've got like 6 hours of sourcing to do tonight. I'm just going to email that. So I would like to think that there's more that you can do to help with people's workflow that is like not incredibly human, or not uniquely human, and actually free people up maybe to have that much more careful and caring rejection call. And maybe that is something we really start to spike on, because that is something that even if you told me an AI was going to be better at it, there's still a part of me that would be like, well, but there is something to the human experience. Like I want to know what this person thought, and like what, and maybe explore it with them, maybe bat around some ideas or whatever it might be. So again, which is good. I'm really glad we are getting dragged into these places that aren't square down Metaview's fairway, but that's sort of how I would think about that. That for me, I would, to be wrong, called by a human, and I think a really great company that's trying to give a great candidate a great experience would probably think the same.
Yeah, I didn't think about that. So technically you could do something to sort of summarize, hey, listen, you've made your decision, great. That silver medalist, you want to keep them, engaged. Maybe the team's going to expand. Maybe you're going to get more, funding, or you're going to, target a new market, and you could really, use that person. So let's make sure we maintain some, friendly, relationship, and not just dump them from the ATS into the CRM and just have a nice day. But to your point, yes, we could give you some key points to have a human conversation. So don't let AI be the messenger. Have that communicate. Yeah, I like that. I like that approach. The other thing that you sort of mentioned was around, you talk about productivity and things like that. One of the things I like about solutions in your space is it's sort of epitomizes what you're trying to do in terms of provide more value to the team. You're literally giving them the time and freedom to have a human-to-human conversation.
Hello, I'm Ruth Thomas, host of Comp and Coffee, where we break down what's next in the world of compensation management. From pay transparency to performance alignment, we explore how businesses are rethinking compensation to drive impact, equity, and growth. So if you're shaping the future of pay at your organization, grab a cup and tune in. Listen on the Work Defined Podcast Network.
As opposed to some of these other AI solutions that are really just, either automation, or they're just trying to make you more productive. This isn't about speed necessarily, although I know speed is important to recruiters, and time to fill and time to hire and things like that. But you want to get it right. And the whole point of like true, AI versus just streamlined, automation is to, sort of put more effort into these human conversations and relationship building and things like that. So I just think that's exactly what it's doing. It's not about making you more productive. You're still sitting in the interview, spending the hour with the candidate. You're just actively listening, and you're having that conversation. So there's a lot of benefits to this sort of human centricity kind of, movement, to ensure that even when we say AI first, it doesn't mean that humans are second. It means that we're focusing on AI, but doing so in a way that, brings out the best of humans.
Yeah, that's a really good distinction. I've never even thought about it in the AI first, human second lens. I guess I think about it more in terms of, AI first as opposed to software first. It's like that's what it's replacing actually, is traditional software, not humans. And I get in a very, I think it's like so much part of the conversation around AI that this is, a lot about giving humans leverage. That doesn't mean to say, I think the whole narrative around AI has sort of matured a little bit. I would say, for my sense, in the last 6 months, where there was a lot of like coping mechanism type talk, maybe for like the first year. Hey, don't worry, it's not going to replace you at all. You're totally fine. It's not going to be that. It's not. There is going to be disruption. I think people are sort of a little bit more sort of at ease with that now. or maybe not at ease, just like at least admitting it to themselves. Disruption is going to be predominantly at the task level. And of course, if you think of a job as a collection of tasks, there'll be different jobs that are affected a different amount by how much AI is eating up some of those tasks or starting to do some of those tasks. For some cases, like I believe in recruiting, it'll be a great thing, because the tasks that people in recruiting love the most are the ones that are really the human-to-human interactions, and the ones that they wish they didn't have to spend so much time doing are the bits in between, which excites us a lot, because we can help them with the bits in between, because we're assisting them during the conversation. We can help them with the bits of between, because that's how you can use the data in that way. But anyway, I guess the point is, yeah, I think sort of baked into the AI first sort of phrase almost is helping humans, but sort of always with this understanding that, of course, there's a bunch of humans out there whose job is to help humans. And you might be replacing those humans. So this sort of like tangled web of, by helping this person, in reality is this other person who used to be helping that person is no longer helping them. So what are they going to do? And there's no right answer to it. It's going to be a big shift.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always, anytime you free up capacity, you've always got to think about how we're going to sort of reinvest that time. And every company might be a little bit different, but just from a human potential perspective, there's probably a lot that person who has been sort of relieved of duty, so to speak, can tackle. I mean, there's always more work to be done. That's why there's going to be, even with the job losses, there's going to be lots of new jobs that crop up, and so there's always more to do.
That's true. The thing that people rightly sometimes get fearful of is, okay, sure, we're going to be fine as humanity, but what about me in particular? Which is like fair thing for people to be concerned about.
Yeah, and that's part of what I talk about all the time on this show is like, don't be caught flat-footed. Start thinking about like your transferable skills, what else you could be doing, and hopefully, the organization has some capacity and some tools to help you figure that out, right? Whether that's more, L&D investment or mentoring or coaching, other places where AI, in fact, could help as well. So I guess it just depends on the rate of AI adoption, within an organization to a degree, but also how they think about it, culturally and philosophically about how they value, the talent in the organization.
It's quite funny you bring up L&D there, actually, because there's almost like a bit of an inception moment you can think of with that, where, okay, listen, previously, if there was like a job displacement issue within your company, the company may not have invested enough in L&D to enable you to actually help you in any way. And actually now, if it happens to you, there's all these L&D AI companies, which means actually the company can help you with the L&D, with the sort of your learning and development around what you're going to do with your career instead, because of AI. So the thing you've been displaced by is a thing that's also training you or sort of giving you the information you need to figure out what to do next, which is like a funny sort of, I guess it just shows how it's sort of, the impact of AI is going to be so all-encompassing that both the sort of the problem and the solution end up being like the same thing.
Well, and that ties to why it's so important just to think sort of two steps ahead and play, chess instead of checkers, or however you want to describe it. But I mean, these things all sort of impact each other. There's the, impact of intersecting trends, and then there's intersecting sort of decisions and strategies that could be counterproductive at the end of the day, or, so I guess when I think about people trying to isolate, where should we invest in AI? Let's look at these particular use cases or whatever. That can be a dangerous lens if that's the only lens that you're looking at it through, because you're not seeing the ripple effects and the compounding effects of some of these, investments. I mean, I think about that in the context of, AI versus AI in the recruiting, process, an AI written job description, an AI written resume, and a third AI evaluating how well those things have matched each other. Like, what are you actually evaluating? Are you evaluating the competency of the candidate or the AI that wrote these documents that you're comparing? So, yeah, so it gets pretty hairy, and so I just think you've got to have that systems thinking approach as you do strategic planning. Sal, just on the I got to put my responsible AI hat on for a minute. As you think about Metaview as a decision support tool in the process, how are you guys approaching, the transparency, the auditability, the explainability of, the AI that you're using when it comes to, the summarizations that are produced and things like that?
So a few things, and all very, I say it's almost like a barbell. There's like things that are very tactical, which I'll go into in a second. And then there's like philosophy, which you can encourage customers to have around, which like we can do a fair bit of influence there, but we're not going to, there's only so much we can do there. So on the tactical side of things, there's like ways companies like ours literally work with the underlying models where you can essentially set the temperature of the AI, where you sort of let it know essentially how creative do you want it to be in its response. And any self-respecting recruitment technology company will be setting that temperature as low as possible. I don't want any creativity. This is not a creative writing exercise. This is like just focus on the facts at hand when you're providing answers. So there is capability built into, these OpenAI, Anthropic, these companies, they have B2B, versions of their products accessible via the API, and they give you a bunch of these controls in order to reduce the chances of, let's say, hallucinations or therefore bias in what's being reported. So that's like point one. Then there's also ways that within the product itself, like almost how let's take notes as an example, notes on an interview, how they generate. You can essentially ask the AI to generate notes on a certain topic, and then also ask the AI in a subsequent task to check the veracity of the note that they provided, and also to cite it. Tell us where in the transcript you got this insight from. And so if you do use Metaview, one thing you'll notice is every single sentence essentially that Metaview generates has a citation saying this is where we derived this from. Now, does that mean that every single time the note that's taken is the perfect interpretation from the citation? Not always. So then that moves you onto your sort of, as much as possible, we try to make it. And I think we're the market leader in accuracy from that regard. But then that brings you onto the sort of the philosophical argument here, which is, listen, these LLMs are incredible. They are fallible. Every single human you've ever hired is also fallible. And these LLMs are fallible too. And so you really have to think of the outputs or the decisions you make as a result of this as, the human is accountable. The human's the one who's going to get fired if it's a bad decision and all these sorts of things. That hasn't changed. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing for humans in the workforce to know that I'm accountable for this. This tool is helping me, but I'm still responsible for its veracity. So that's the philosophical. One thing, just to come back really quickly to again, tactically in the product, how do we, I would say maybe enable accuracy more than, I think we do as much as we can to ensure it, but there's also in parts where we just enable increased accuracy. It's really important for, powerful AI products like ours to give the customer lots of inroads into influencing the output of the LLM. What I mean by that is you probably don't want to just rock up. You do initially rock up to Metaview, get some notes from your conversations. It will do a really good job. But what you'll quickly learn is you want to start to almost inherently weight and bias actually the AI the way you want it to go. Focus on the information that you think is most important, given the role or whatever it might be. And so we have plenty of inroads where you can essentially instruct the AI what you want it to focus on when it's generating its notes. You can literally tell it, don't ever include anything in the notes unless it was explicitly mentioned. Only focus on these topics in the notes. If any of this stuff was mentioned, don't include it in the notes. So you can really sort of impose your will essentially on the AI, which initially we actually thought of as a bad thing. There should be traditional software. Walk up to it, use it, make it as easy to use as possible. There's a bunch of that's true, and it's still to get going. We still want to maintain that, but actually the last mile is that's increasingly becoming the work. And the people who know how to get the best out of AI are the people who are going to do best in their career. And it's actually a big part of what we do is we create the user experience. We create the surface and the canvas for them to have this influence over what the LLM outputs so that it can be more accurate, more relevant to them, more comprehensive given what they're trying to achieve.
Got it. Okay. No, that's super helpful. I think one of the things I probably asked Mark Simpson this from Pillar last year when we had a conversation, but one of the things that I always get concerned about is not that it drew an incorrect conclusion, but if people only relied on the summary, did the summary miss something that a human would have picked up on? A piece of something contextual, some little tidbit that gave you a hint that as to the way that they think, the way that they make decisions, the way that they resolve conflict. Whatever it might be, could it be possible that it missed something? Not that human note takers, again, going back to a traditional method, this probably happens every single day. But as you know, Sal, like people are holding AI to this much higher, close to impossible, standard of accuracy and trustworthiness, which is misplaced to a degree, but at the same time, it is what it is.
It's for everyone's benefit. Like the classic example of like being held to these high standards is obviously self-driving cars, where actually like per mile self-driving cars have far less crashes. But am I glad that the self-driving car innovators feel under pressure to have an even safer? Yes, I am. I want them to feel that pressure. And I think it's probably a good thing that companies like ours feel pressure to like make sure that stuff doesn't, or make sure that happens as infrequently as possible. I think it's sensible to have, the maturity to understand these are not deterministic systems, and therefore, this is, I guess, where I think the market has moved is from, maybe placing some of these unfair expectations on the AI, or only using it in sort of, almost like surface level use cases, not really deep ones. That's probably been the first couple of years of this. I think now people have said, no, we're no longer questioning whether LLMs are really powerful. They are really powerful. And now we have to figure out how to safely get them into the center of our workflow because it's worth it. We haven't achieved that yet, as in because there's still a few things, there's still imperfections, and we're still figuring out maybe some of our behaviors around how, when it generates data, how do we behave and how do we treat that data? But that's the sort of what the next year or so is going to be about, is working out these, how much of it is ways of working changing versus how much is the AI companies need to improve things, otherwise it's not going to fly. I think that's where we are now. And so if one of the questions people should often think about is, you've mentioned it, like, and not getting left behind. If you put up every single obstacle you can as to your reason for not wanting to get on the train, then good luck, because the world will pass you by. And there's already so much benefit from these things, even with this fragility in certain corners, that, you're far better taking that sort of almost cynicism and keeping that stuff in mind when you think about how you're using it, but still use it. Like there's you can't have this like, hey, I'm only going to start using it once it's like totally perfect, because it will never happen.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you 100%. I talk to school administrators about this. You can't just, put your head in the sand. This is part of the future of education. You've got to incorporate it. You've got to do it logically. You've got to do it sensibly, but you have to start. Perfection, you just can't wait for in any of these contexts. So I wholeheartedly agree with you there. Sal, I want to be respectful of your time. And I guess, any final thoughts, anything you guys are thinking about? What's next? I know you just got an influx of cash from some investors for your last round. So congrats on that. Any thoughts on where that's, well, I'm sure you've got thoughts about where that's going. I'm sure they asked you where it was going to go if they gave it to you. So yeah, just at that, and any just closing thoughts for the listener.
Yeah, I think it all comes down to that last point of this transition we're going through as a species over the next year, which I think is all about. Species is too grandiose. Leaders of businesses, you're seeing these AI mandate proclamations. There is a little bit of I don't want to say AI for AI's sake, but there is like a push towards AI because it feels existentially important to business leaders for companies to be like right on the wave, right, or even ahead of the curve with adoption of AI, because of all the unknown benefits we may accrue. Like these leaders, frankly, are not able to say we should use AI in this way and this way and this way for this benefit, and this benefit, but they need their people to go and like find out the best ways to use this technology because they're so convinced that it's so key. And so I think that's really what we're responsible for over the next year or two is, obviously we have like very strong ideas about where we think might be the most impactful way to build these things, but like staying close to customers and really starting to re-engineer how we hire with this at the core, maybe take away some of the assumptions about how hiring's done. When you assume, humans are responsible for every single step. If you no longer have that assumption, how does it change? That's what we're trying to figure out.
Well, Sal, thanks so much for joining me in the studio here. Really, really appreciate it. Really insightful. Congrats again on all your work that you're doing, the growth trajectory, and yeah, best of luck to you guys. Hopefully I'll see you at some of the conferences later this year.
Thanks so much, Bob. Really appreciate it, and looking forward to seeing you too.
Likewise. All right. Thanks everyone for listening. See you next time.